You know, there's a specific kind of silence that falls over a train station right before all hell breaks loose. It's not quiet, exactly, because you've still got the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant rumble of locomotives, but the human noise just stops, like everyone is collectively holding their breath because they sense something primal is about to happen. And that's exactly how it felt on a Tuesday night at Union Station in Chicago, right in the middle of the worst blizzard we'd seen in a decade. Officer Jack Miller, a man who's got more gray in his beard than he cares to admit and knees that pop every time the barometric pressure drops, was walking his beat with Shadow, a Belgian Malinois who looks like he was carved out of black marble and has an attitude to match, and honestly, Jack was just thinking about his thermos of coffee sitting in the break room and how much he wanted to be drinking it instead of dodging wet umbrellas and tourists dragging luggage the size of small cars. See, Shadow isn't your typical K-9 unit. Most dogs are trained to sit passive when they smell something off, nice and polite like they're waiting for a treat, but Shadow was a rescue from a failed program down south, a dog with too much drive and a bit of a mean streak if you looked at him sideways, which is why Jack loved him, because Jack felt pretty much the same way about the world most days. The station was a mess, flights were grounded so everyone was trying to catch a train, jamming the concourse shoulder to shoulder, a sea of wet wool coats and frustration, and Jack was navigating through this chaos, keeping Shadow on a short lead, watching the dog's ears swivel like radar dishes, twitching at every high-pitched laugh or dropped phone, just doing the rounds, scanning the bags, looking for the usual stuff, drugs moving north, cash moving south, maybe the occasional explosive residue if it was a really bad day. They were passing a stack of luggage near Gate B, a pile left by a tour group trying to rebook their tickets, when Shadow stopped dead in his tracks, didn't slow down, didn't sniff around casually, he just locked up like he'd hit an invisible wall, his hackles rising up along his spine until he looked twice his size, and a low, guttural growl started rumbling in his chest, a sound so deep you could feel it in the soles of your boots. Jack tugged the leash gently, whispering, "Easy, buddy, leave it," thinking maybe someone had a ham sandwich in there or maybe a cat carrier, but Shadow wasn't having it. He lunged, snapping the leather taut, dragging Jack 2 steps forward toward a large, hard-shell musician's road case, black, battered, stickers from dive bars all over it, looked like it belonged to a touring bass player who'd seen better days. Now, usually, when a dog hits on a bag, people get curious, they stop and stare, but Shadow wasn't just hitting on it, he was trying to murder it, he was clawing at the heavy metal latches, barking with this high-pitched, frantic yelp that didn't sound like aggression, it sounded like panic, like he was screaming, "Help," in a language only he knew, and that's when the crowd started to back away, forming that circle of fear. Phones coming out to record the crazy police dog attacking luggage. Jack knew dogs, he'd been working K-9 for 20 years, and he knew that dogs don't panic for heroin and they don't cry for C4, so a cold knot of dread started tightening right in the center of his chest because he realized Shadow wasn't smelling a thing, he was smelling a person, or maybe, God forbid, the blood of a person. Back up. Everyone back the hell up now. Jack roared, his voice cutting through the noise of the terminal, his hand resting on his holster not because he wanted to shoot but because he needed people to know he was serious, and while the rookie security guard started fumbling with the yellow tape, Jack dropped to his knees beside the thrashing dog, trying to get a grip on the road case without getting bitten by his own partner. "Is it a bomb?" some teenager shouted, holding his phone up like a shield, and Jack ignored him, focusing on the case, seeing that it wasn't locked with a standard key but had heavy-duty padlocks on both sides, and Shadow was biting the metal, actually cracking a tooth, bleeding from his gums, desperate to get inside, whining now, a pathetic, heartbreaking sound that made the hair on Jack's arm stand up. "Protocol says you wait for the bomb squad, you clear the area, you bring in the robot, you don't touch the suspicious package," but looking at Shadow, Jack made a split-second decision that could cost him his badge. He pulled his baton, jammed it into the hasp of the lock, and leveraged his entire body weight against it, groaning as the metal screeched, adrenaline dumping into his system because if this was a bomb, he was about to turn into pink mist, but his gut screamed that it wasn't. The first lock snapped with a sound like a gunshot, echoing off the marble walls, making the crowd scream and duck, but Jack didn't stop, he moved to the second one, sweat stinging his eyes despite the freezing draft from the doors, and Shadow was right there, nose pressed to the crack, sniffing frantically, his tail tucked between his legs. When the second lock gave way, Jack didn't hesitate, he threw the lid open, bracing himself for the worst thing he could imagine, maybe a body, maybe parts of a body, but what he saw froze the breath in his lungs and made the entire station go silent for a heartbeat. Curled up inside the foam padding, which had been crudely cut out with a knife to make a hollow space, was a boy, couldn't have been more than 4 years old, wearing oversized headphones and a sleep mask, his hands bound with zip ties, looking like a broken doll in a velvet coffin. "Jesus Christ," Jack whispered, the air leaving him in a rush, and for a terrifying second, the boy didn't move, he was too still, his skin pale and waxy under the harsh station lights, and Shadow immediately stopped barking, shoving his muzzle into the case, licking the boy's face, whining soft and low, nudging the kid's shoulder. "Medic! I need a medic right now!" Jack screamed, his voice cracking, terrified that he was looking at a corpse, but then the boy twitched, a tiny, jerky movement, and let out a soft, drug-induced groan, and the relief that washed over Jack was so intense he almost threw up right there on the pole. While the facial recognition software spun its wheels, a commotion erupted at the precinct's front desk, a woman, disheveled, hysterical, screaming in a mix of English and Spanish, fighting past the desk sergeant. Jack stepped out, Shadow at his heel, and saw her, Elena, maybe late 20s, wearing a waitress uniform under a cheap coat, tears streaming down her face, holding a crumpled photo. "My son. Leo. He's gone, his father took him, he took him." Jack gently guided her to a chair, kneeling down so he wasn't towering over her. "Ma'am, look at me, we found a boy, is his name Leo?" She sobbed, nodding violently, "Yes, yes, Leo, he has a scar on his chin, he loves dinosaurs," and when Jack showed her a picture the paramedics had taken, she let out a wail that tore through the station, a sound of pure, raw grief and relief mixed together. "Who took him, Elena?" Jack asked, his voice hard as steel. "Who is the man in the gray coat?" She looked at the screen, her eyes hardening, the fear turning into a burning rage. "That's not his father, that's his grandfather. That's Marcus Sterling." Jack froze. Marcus Sterling. The real estate mogul. The guy who owned half the skyline of Chicago. The guy who had been on the cover of Forbes. This wasn't just a kidnapping, this was a war between the haves and the have-nots, playing out with a child as the pawn. "He told me I wasn't good enough," Elena whispered, her hands shaking as she petted Shadow, who had instinctively moved to comfort her. "He said raising a Sterling in a trailer park was abuse. He offered me money to disappear. When I said no, he said he'd erase me." "He didn't just try to erase you," Jack muttered, looking back at the surveillance footage where Sterling was walking away cool as a cucumber. "He tried to ship his own grandson out of state like a set of golf clubs." The radio crackled. "Unit 4, facial rec confirms Marcus Sterling. We have him on camera heading toward the lower maintenance tunnels near track 9. Trains are stopped, he can't get out." Jack stood up, checking his weapon, snapping Shadow's leash back onto his vest. "He's not leaving this station." The tunnels under Union Station are a labyrinth, a dark, dripping maze of old brick and rusted steel that dates back to the 1920s, full of rats and shadows, and that's where Sterling had gone, probably looking for a private charter or a maintenance exit to a waiting car, thinking he was untouchable, thinking his money bought him a different set of rules. Jack and Shadow moved into the dark, the sounds of the station fading away, replaced by the drip-drip-drip of leaking pipes and the echo of their own footsteps. "Find him, Shadow," Jack whispered, giving the command, and the dog lowered his head, tracking the scent of expensive cologne and fear in the damp air. They were deep in the belly of the beast now, miles of concrete catacombs, and Jack knew that a man like Sterling, cornered and arrogant, was dangerous not because he had a gun, but because he believed he was right, and men who believe they are righteous will do absolutely anything. Shadow stopped at a heavy steel door, his ears pricked forward, a low rumble starting in his throat again, not the panic of before, but the deep, menacing warning of a predator who has found its prey. Jack drew his service weapon, kicked the door open, and stepped into the dim light of an old generator room, and there, standing by an emergency hatch, was Marcus Sterling, looking annoyed rather than afraid, brushing dust off his expensive coat. "Officer," Sterling said, his voice smooth, cultured, echoing off the cold walls. "You're making a terrible mistake. I'm simply rescuing my grandson from a life of squalor." "You put a child in a box, Marcus," Jack spat, keeping the gun leveled, Shadow straining at the lead, ready to launch. "You treated him like luggage." "I treated him like an asset that needed protection." Sterling snapped, his mask of civility slipping for a second. "Do you know what that woman feeds him? Do you know where he sleeps? I have a jet waiting. He was going to Switzerland. Top schools. Fresh air. A future. I was saving him." "You were stealing him," Jack countered, stepping closer. "Put your hands on your head." Sterling laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "I don't think so. I make one phone call, officer, and your career is over. I own the mayor. I own the commissioner. You take those cuffs out, and you'll be working security at a mall by Monday." He reached into his coat pocket, not for a phone, but for something metallic, and Jack tightened his finger on the trigger, shouting, "Don't do it," but Sterling wasn't pulling a gun, he was pulling a taser, a high-voltage civilian model, and he lunged, not at Jack, but at Shadow, trying to take out the dog. It was a stupid move. Shadow didn't wait for a command. He moved faster than human reaction time, a blur of black fur and teeth. He dodged the taser arc, twisted in midair, and latched onto Sterling's forearm, the bite sleeve training kicking in, but this time it was flesh and expensive wool. Sterling screamed, dropping the taser, flailing, smashing against the generator, but Shadow held on, shaking his head, dragging the man to the dirty concrete floor, controlling him completely, not mauling him, just neutralizing the threat with terrifying efficiency. "Call him off. Get him off me." Sterling shrieked, all his dignity gone, reduced to a terrified man in the mud. Jack stepped forward, holstering his gun, looking down at the billionaire writhing under the paws of a shelter dog who used to eat out of dumpsters. "Shadow, AUS." The dog released instantly, stepping back but keeping an intense watch, licking his lips, waiting for the man to twitch. "Marcus Sterling," Jack said, pulling out his cup. "Now, dragging a man worth $1 billion out of a sewer tunnel in handcuffs isn't exactly standard procedure, and let me tell you, Marcus Sterling did not go quietly. He was threatening lawsuits, threatening to buy the police department and turn it into a parking lot, sputtering about how we didn't understand the complexity of the situation, but the moment we walked him out onto the main concourse, something shifted. See, the crowd hadn't left. The blizzard had locked everyone inside, so you had 2,000 people who had seen the boy in the box, who had seen the mother weeping, and when they saw Jack walking Sterling out, dirt on his fancy coat, wrists bound in steel, a silence fell over the room that was heavier than the one before. Someone started clapping. Just one person at first, maybe a tired nurse or a stranded student, and then it spread, a wave of applause, not polite golf claps, but angry, vindictive, triumphant applause, people cheering for the dog, cheering for the mom, cheering for the fact that for once, the guy with the private jet didn't get away with it. Back at the precinct, the interrogation room felt small and cold, nothing like the boardroom Sterling was used to. He sat there, his arm bandaged where Shadow had tagged him, looking at Jack with eyes that were cold and dead, totally devoid of empathy. "You think you're a hero, Officer Miller?" Sterling sneered, leaning forward. "You returned a future king to a peasant. That boy was going to run empires. Now he'll be lucky to manage a gas station. That's what you saved him for. Mediocrity." Jack leaned back in his chair, sipping lukewarm coffee, looking at this man who honestly believed his own delusions. "You know, Marcus, I saw Leo with his mom an hour ago. He wasn't asking for a stock portfolio. He was asking for a hug. He was asking if she was okay. You can buy a lot of things, but you can't buy the way that kid looked at her. Sentimentality is a disease of the poor," Sterling spat back, and that's when Jack knew there was no reaching him, no remorse to be found, just a twisted ego that had curdled into madness. The legal battle that followed was a circus. Sterling's lawyers descended like vultures, trying to spin the story, claiming the mother was unfit, claiming the box was a secure transport module, trying to bury the department in paperwork, but they forgot one thing: the footage. The video of that little boy, zipped tied and drugged, curled up in a box, leaked. Maybe Jack left a file open, maybe the captain looked the other way, who knows, but it hit the internet and the court of public opinion delivered a verdict faster than any judge. Sterling's empire took a hit, stocks tumbled, board members resigned, and suddenly, the secure transport defense didn't look so good when the whole world wanted his head on a platter. But the real ending, the one that matters, happened about 3 weeks later. Jack was off duty, sitting on his porch, throwing a tennis ball for Shadow, who was tearing up the snowy yard like a puppy, when a beat-up sedan pulled into the driveway. It was Elena. She looked tired, dark circles under her eyes, working double shifts to pay legal fees, but she had Leo with her. The kid was bundled up in a puffy coat that was a little too big for him, holding a plastic dinosaur. "Detective," Elena said, standing by the gate, looking shy. We wanted to say thank you." "Properly." Jack waved them in. "It's just Jack, Elena. And you don't owe me a thing." Leo hid behind his mom's leg, peeking out at Shadow. The dog stopped chewing his ball, ears perking up, and trotted over, not charging, but walking soft, that gentle trot he saved for the vulnerable ones. He sat down in front of the boy and offered a paw. Leo giggled, a sound purely innocent, and reached out to touch the wet black nose. "Hi, Shadow," he whispered. Elena watched them, tears welling up again. "He still has nightmares," she admitted quietly to Jack. "He wakes up screaming about the dark box. But, whenever he talks about the dog, he smiles. You gave him a hero, Jack. You didn't just save his life, you gave him something good to remember in the middle of all the bad." Jack looked at the kid, hugging the neck of a dog that the military had classified as too aggressive for service, and he thought about Sterling's words, about mediocrity, about success. "He's gonna be fine," Jack said, voice thick with emotion. "He's got you. And he knows that when things get dark, someone's gonna come looking for him. That's worth more than a Swiss boarding school." As they drove away, Jack sat there for a long time, scratching Shadow behind the ears, watching the snow start to fall again, covering the tire tracks, covering the dirt of the city. It makes you think, doesn't it? We live in a world where a man can justify locking his own flesh and blood in a crate because he thinks he knows what's best, where wealth convinces people they are gods, and where a cast-off dog from a kill shelter has more humanity in his little toe than a billionaire has in his whole body. It kind of begs the question, what is best for a child? Is it the safety